Thanks, Casey. Certainly one of the more interesting and maybe surprising races this year was the race for Illinois Governor. Pat Quinn and Bruce Rauner. When we talk about Illinois stuff, we like to bring in Amanda Vinicky, who's the State House reporter for Illinois Public Radio. You hear her reports on KWMU, St. Louis Public Radio. Amanda, I was a little baffled by this entire race, the campaign as well. We certainly saw lots of ads in the St. Louis area for this. Can you explain how Rauner did what he did to Pat Quinn?
Well, I think a lot of people were surprised, frankly, because none of the polls had this as the outcome. It was supposed to be basically a very, very close race, and instead, Rauner, he didn't run away with it. It wasn't overwhelming, but he got a very clear majority. I think what it really shows is that people were unhappy with not all Democrats in Illinois. We're still very much a blue state, it appears, but they were unhappy with the guy at the top, with Pat Quinn. And they also very much believed Bruce Rauner and his promises of prosperity. So all of those ads, very nasty. I'm not sure how excited anybody was to really vote for either of these guys. I think there was a lot of nose plugging at that, to be perfectly honest, but nonetheless, that they wanted change, hope and change.
There were a lot of things that were being said in the ads, but could we identify a particular issue that this seemed to swing on, or was it really about personalities, and was it really about money and all of that?
You know, I'm not sure if there is one way to gauge. I'm sure everybody has a different reason for voting what they did, and yet I think that the takeaway has to be the economy and in general how state government is going. Pat Quinn tried to vilify Bruce Rauner and say that he was this horrible man who put profits ahead of people, and that was his message. He didn't necessarily have a clear message for what he wanted to do. Talked a lot about raising the minimum wage, and that appeals to some people, but that is not what you have a lot of voters as their primary concern. He tried to say that Illinois was making a comeback, and yes, Illinois had done better when you look at unemployment rates the past few months, but not well enough. I don't think that many Illinoisans had a good feeling about where their state was going, and necessarily that Pat Quinn was the guy to do it. You know, we saw every newspaper virtually in the state, with I think the exception of 2, endorse Bruce Rauner. I think that is telling. It shows how much people really were just looking for something different. And Bruce Rauner, a lot of questions. Some of those negative ads are going to carry over and make it difficult for him, I think, to govern.
And this guy did spend
big of a bully, you know?
Yeah, he did spend an awful lot of his own money. I mean, that's what really jumps out in this particular race.
More than $27 million. The race overall was $100 million, much of that on the Rauner side, because it wasn't just his big money, it was that of his well-heeled friends. And so a lot of questions, what are they going to be expecting exactly? And will Rauner really look out for the little guy, or is he just going to be concerned with his fellow former and current CEO buds? He has definitely tried to make that a message. However, since even on election night, his victory speech focusing on compassion and taking care of the most vulnerable. I just came from an announcement of his transition team where, again, he hit that note, continually said competitiveness, which we heard from him throughout the campaign, but also compassion. You're right, though. So much money spent on both sides. I am curious to see if Illinois will take up at this point any revisions to its campaign finance laws. They were supposed to take effect and put caps on the governor's race for this first time. Instead, they were lifted because Rauner early on put enough money in with self-financing that there weren't any sort of contribution caps. Maybe that'll change going forward.
Let me ask you this, because you can, if anyone can understand and explain how things work in the state capitol. But the legislature is still the legislature. Michael Madigan is still the Speaker of the House forever. So what does a Republican governor, what difference can a Republican governor make in a state with such a dominant Democratic majority in the legislature?
First of all, I want to touch on something that I think is really an important takeaway of this election, and that is Speaker Mike Madigan's success. Not only does he hold on to a majority, but a super majority. So both chambers of the General Assembly have that. There wasn't really any chance of the Senate changing, but the House was. House Republicans had hoped to make inroads, and instead they're staying with those 71 members. That will make it more difficult for a Republican governor to get his way. We've seen Rauner talk a lot again since re-election. Throughout the campaign, he said, naughty, 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 these long-term politicians, we need term limits. And now he has said that he is reaching out and that the voters want bipartisan. I think we're also already seeing the difficulty of that. However, kind of this mess and a flub during his victory speech. He said that he had spoken with House Speaker Madigan and President John Cullerton, and then their camps say, no,
Right.
that never happened. We don't know what you're talking about. We got some clarification. Now, Rauner says he left a message for the Speaker's Chief of Staff and talked to the President's Chief of Staff. That's not those guys. They haven't reached out to him since. I guess a meeting could be set up soon, or at
Sure.
least that's what
So
Mr. Rauner is wanting. But it ain't good.